Lord Peter Wimsey paused at the wrought-iron gates of Thornfield Manor, regarding the Gothic revival monstrosity beyond, with the sort of pained expression typically reserved for amateur performances of Hamlet. The house appeared to have been designed by someone laboring under the delusion that architectural virtue lay in the enthusiastic accumulation of turrets, battlements, and flying buttresses, rather like a medieval castle that had suffered a nervous breakdown and decided to compensate by growing additional limbs. "I say, Bunter," he remarked to his valet, who was extracting their luggage from the Daimler with his customary precision. Whoever informed the architect that combining Norman keeps with Tudor chimneys and Victorian conservatories would produce aesthetic harmony was clearly operating under a fundamental misapprehension about the nature of beauty itself. "Indeed, my lord," Bunter replied with the diplomatic neutrality that suggested he had formed considerably more damning opinions about Thornfield Manor's architectural pretensions. The telegram from Inspector Parker mentioned that Sir Reginald Thornfield was particularly proud of the house's unique mechanical innovations. Mechanical innovations in a Gothic revival manner, Wimsey mused, adjusting his monocle as they approached the imposing oak door. One shudders to contemplate what sort of medieval industrial hybrid the good Sir Reginald has inflicted upon unsuspecting houseguests, though I confess the circumstances of our invitation suggest his innovations may have proved rather more lethal than merely aesthetically offensive. The circumstances, as related by Chief Inspector Parker over an indifferent dinner at the Diogenes Club the previous evening, were indeed troubling. Sir Reginald's younger brother, Captain Maurice Thornfield, it had been discovered that morning in what the family persisted in calling the mechanical lift, a contraption installed by Sir Reginald's late father to transport guests between the manor's 4 floors. The captain had been found quite thoroughly dead, and the manner of his demise had puzzled both the local constabulary and the family physician. "The thing is, Peter," Parker had explained while contemplating his mutton with evident suspicion, "the family insists it was a mechanical failure. The lift is apparently one of those early hydraulic affairs, all brass fittings and steel cables. But the local inspector has his doubts, and frankly, so do I." Doubts regarding the mechanical failure, or doubts regarding the family's version of events? Both. Captain Thornfield had recently returned from India with some rather inconvenient questions about the family finances. Apparently, he'd discovered certain irregularities in the management of the estate during his absence, the sort of irregularities that might prompt a younger brother to demand a rather uncomfortable accounting from his elder. Now, standing before the heavy oak door, adorned with a brass knocker shaped like a grinning gargoyle, Wimsey found himself wondering what particular species of family discord had claimed poor Captain Maurice. The knocker seemed to leer at him with knowing malevolence, as though it had witnessed considerably more than its share of domestic unpleasantness. Before he could lift the offensive ornament, however, the door swung open with theatrical precision to reveal a tall, cadaverous butler whose expression suggested he had been professionally trained in the art of conveying disapproval through facial arrangement alone. "Lord Peter Wimsey, I presume," the butler intoned in a voice that managed to suggest both deference and barely concealed disdain. "Guilty as charged, though I do hope that particular phrase won't prove prophetic during my visit." "You would be?" "Blackwood, my lord. Sir Reginald is expecting you in the morning room." The butler's pause was calculated with mathematical precision. The mechanical lift remains unavailable for inspection. "Ah, yes, the scene of the mechanical failure. Or should I say, the scene of the mechanical mystery. I confess I'm never entirely certain of the proper terminology when dealing with deceased persons and suspect machinery." Blackwood led them through a series of corridors that seemed designed more to confuse than transport. The walls were lined with portraits of previous Thornfields, all of whom appeared to have been painted by artists who specialized in capturing expressions of chronic indigestion. Gas fixtures, converted somewhat reluctantly to electricity, cast uncertain shadows that seemed to shift and dance with each footstep. "Tell me, Blackwood," Wimsey said as they navigated what appeared to be the third identical hallway, "how long have you been in service with the Thornfield family?" 28 years, my lord. Then you would have been present when Sir Reginald's father installed this mechanical lift." "Indeed, my lord. The late Sir Percival was most enthusiastic about modern conveniences. The lift was his particular pride, all steel cables and brass fittings, operated by a hydraulic system of his own design. And Captain Maurice was familiar with its operation? Oh yes, my lord. As boys, both Sir Reginald and Captain Maurice were forever experimenting with the mechanism, though I must say, Captain Maurice had developed certain theories about recent modifications to the system. Theories. Blackwood's expression grew even more professionally neutral, if such a thing were possible. The captain had suggested that certain adjustments might have been made to the lift's safety mechanisms, my lord, adjustments that were not entirely documented. Whimsy filed this intelligence away as they arrived at a door that Blackwood opened with the sort of theatrical flourish that suggested missed opportunities on the London stage. The morning room beyond was a testament to the Victorian conviction that no surface should remain undecorated. Every available inch was covered with either wallpaper, tapestry, or photographs of deceased relatives in elaborate frames. Sir Reginald Thornfield rose from a chair that appeared to have been upholstered in what had once been a particularly unfortunate Persian carpet. He was a man in his 50s, with the sort of carefully maintained whiskers that suggested he took both his grooming and his social position with appropriate gravity. "Lord Peter, how extraordinarily good of you to come, though I confess I rather hoped we might meet under more pleasant circumstances." "Indeed, Sir Reginald. Please accept my condolences on the loss of your brother. I understand the circumstances were somewhat mechanically complex." "Mechanically complex is one way of putting it." Sir Reginald gestured toward a chair that looked marginally less hostile than its companions. "I'm afraid poor Maurice's fascination with the lift's operation finally proved his undoing, though between you and me, Lord Peter, I can't help but wonder if there wasn't something more deliberate about the whole affair." "Something more deliberate?" "Well, you see, Maurice had been rather difficult since his return from India. Ever since he began examining the estate's financial records, he'd been asking increasingly uncomfortable questions about certain expenditures. Nothing actionable, you understand, but decidedly unpleasant for family harmony." Whimsy settled into his chair and produced his cigarette case, with the deliberate care of a man who understood that the most valuable intelligence was often gathered during the small silences in conversation. "Family disputes over financial management are unfortunately common, Sir Reginald, though I confess I'm curious about this mechanical lift. It seems rather an exotic feature for a country manor." "Oh, that was Father's doing. He suffered from a weak heart, you see, and found the stairs increasingly taxing. The lift runs from the cellars up to the 3rd floor, though we've always been most careful about its maintenance. The mechanism is quite complex, all steel cables and hydraulic pressure." "But your brother understood its operation?" "Maurice knew every gear and pulley in the system. It was rather his mechanical hobby, you might say." Sir Reginald's expression darkened slightly, though I sometimes wondered if his interest hadn't become rather obsessive. "Obsessive in what way?" "Well, Lord Peter, I hesitate to speak ill of the dead, but Maurice had developed some rather peculiar theories about recent modifications to the lift. He claimed someone had been tampering with the safety mechanisms, adjusting the cable tensions, that sort of thing. Frankly, I began to worry that his suspicions were affecting his judgment about more than just mechanical matters." Whimsy drew thoughtfully on his cigarette, noting the faint tremor in Sir Reginald's hands as he reached for his brandy glass. "And yet he continued to use this lift, a mechanism he suspected had been deliberately compromised. Precisely what troubles me, Lord Peter. Either my brother had finally taken leave of his senses, or—" Sir Reginald allowed the sentence to hang in the air like smoke from Whimsy's cigarette. "Or someone ensured that his mechanical expertise would prove fatal rather than protective." Before Sir Reginald could respond, a peculiar sound echoed through the morning room, a faint, rhythmic clanking that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves. It was the unmistakable sound of steel cables moving over pulleys, accompanied by the subtle hiss of hydraulic pressure. Whimsy lifted his head, his expression shifting from polite interest to sharp attention. "I say, Sir Reginald, I thought you mentioned the lift was currently unavailable." "It is, Lord Peter. We locked the mechanism immediately after discovering Maurice. No one should be operating it." The clanking continued for several more seconds, then stopped with a final, decisive clunk that seemed to echo through the house's very bones. In the silence that followed, Whimsy could have sworn he heard the faint whisper of steel cables settling into position. "How extraordinarily interesting," he murmured, rising from his chair with the fluid grace of a man who had suddenly discovered something far more intriguing than morning conversation. "I believe, Sir Reginald, that your mechanical lift has just provided us with our first genuine clue. Shall we investigate this particular impossibility together?" And with that, Lord Peter Wimsey set off toward what promised to be either a perfectly rational explanation or a most delightfully irrational murder. The mechanical lift occupied a shaft carved from Thornfield Manor's original stone, with Victorian determination that viewed architectural obstacles as mere suggestions. Wimsey examined the brass-fitted control panel with the absorbed attention of a scholar contemplating a particularly recalcitrant manuscript, while Sir Reginald hovered with the nervous energy of a man discovering his domestic arrangements were considerably more sinister than previously supposed. The contraption itself was magnificent, if slightly menacing, gleaming brass and polished mahogany, enclosing a cage of heavy ironwork, suspended by steel cables that disappeared into the gloom above. The lift doors, an ornate lattice of twisted metal, stood ajar by several inches, revealing nothing but shadowed interior. "You mentioned this was secured, Blackwood?" Wimsey inquired mildly, gesturing toward the partially open doors. "One might infer from its current accessibility that security measures have proved somewhat flexible." Blackwood's usual composure frayed visibly. "Indeed, my lord. The main power switch in the cellar was disengaged immediately after Captain Maurice's incident. The hydraulic access panel was secured with a padlock." He approached the lift with horrified fascination, his fingers hovering over the brass lever as though it might bite. "It is quite impossible for it to have moved." "Impossible," Wimsey murmured, kneeling to examine fresh scuff marks on the polished floorboards beneath the doors. "And yet it has undeniably moved. These marks suggest someone, perhaps in considerable haste, recently exited this conveyance." He straightened, producing his magnifying glass. "The mechanism appears to be Sir Percival's hybrid design hydraulic pressure combined with steel cable redundancy. Rather sophisticated for a domestic installation. Father was most particular about safety features," Sir Reginald explained, his voice strained, though Maurice had recently developed theories about unauthorized modifications to those very features. Modifications that might explain how a secured mechanism operated itself. Wimsey's monocle caught the gaslight with sharp gleam. "How fascinating. Perhaps we should inquire whether anyone else possesses unusual familiarity with hydraulic systems." Their investigation naturally began with the household staff, each of whom swore they knew absolutely nothing, while simultaneously revealing considerably more than they intended. Mrs. Higgins, the cook, was discovered wrestling a particularly stubborn joint of beef, her formidable girth testament to generous portions. "Me, Lord, tampering with that death trap? Not likely." Her florid face radiated indignation. "Though I did hear a bit of rumbling just before dawn, like the boiler playing up. But I paid it no mind, what with preparing Sir Reginald's morning scones." Wimsey noted the faint tremor in her flour-dusted hands. "This rumbling might it have resembled the sound of steel cables and hydraulic pressure? Well, now that you mention it, Lord," Mrs. Higgins faltered, her defiant expression wavering. "It did have a rather mechanical quality to it." Agnes, the senior housemaid, proved even more illuminating in her denials. A wisp of a woman with darting eyes. She was found dusting porcelain shepherdesses in the drawing-room. "Oh no, my lord, I heard nothing. Though." She wrung her hands nervously. "Captain Maurice was always saying the lift had secrets, said it could be made to do things it wasn't meant to do. Gave me the creeps, it did. Secrets." Wimsey's eyebrow arched with interest. Did he elaborate on these mechanical mysteries? Just muttered about hidden switches and emergency overrides. Always tinkering in the cellars, he was. Said someone had been adjusting the safety mechanisms without proper documentation. The gardener, Grogan, provided the most intriguing contradiction of all. A taciturn man with soil-ingrained hands, he claimed to have heard nothing unusual during his pre-dawn work in the rose garden. yet his thumb worried constantly at a loose thread while speaking, and his gaze fixed determinedly on some point beyond Whimsy's shoulder. Captain Maurice was always about early, Grogan admitted. Reluctantly, fancied himself an engineer, always poking about the cellars, checking foundations and such. Though mostly, I reckon, he just liked to tinker. And this morning's tinkering might have involved the lift mechanism? Wouldn't know, sir. Never paid attention to his mechanical fancies. Whimsy thanked each servant with elaborate courtesy, noting how their collective ignorance formed a remarkably detailed picture of Captain Maurice's recent activities. The nothing-at-all chorus was harmonizing beautifully, but individual notes revealed a melody of quiet contradictions, trembling hands, nervous gestures, and carefully avoided gazes, all suggesting that Thornfield Manor's domestic staff possessed considerably more knowledge than they cared to admit. Returning to the lift shaft, Whimsy discovered Blackwood examining the brass control panel with renewed attention. "My lord," the butler said slowly, "I believe I may have discovered something rather disturbing. This emergency override mechanism, it appears to have been recently activated." Whimsy peered at the small brass panel Blackwood indicated. Hidden behind the main controls was a secondary lever, nearly invisible, unless one knew precisely where to look. Fresh scratches on its surface suggested recent use, and more tellingly, a small piece of dark fabric clung to its edge. "Silk," Whimsy observed, carefully extracting the fragment with his pocket knife. "Rather fine quality, I should say. The sort worn by someone accustomed to elegant dress rather than mechanical tinkering." "But, my lord," Blackwood protested, "only Captain Maurice and I knew of this override's existence. Sir Percival installed it as a safety measure, but kept its location secret to prevent unauthorized access." "Secret from the family, perhaps," Whimsy mused, examining the silk fragment in the gaslight. "But not, apparently, from someone who had been conducting rather thorough investigations into the lift's recent modifications. The implications hung in the air like the faint scent of hydraulic oil and mechanical precision. Someone had indeed operated the lift that morning, someone wearing silk, someone with knowledge of hidden controls, someone who had departed in sufficient haste to leave both physical evidence and a household full of nervously lying servants. "I believe, Blackwood," Whimsy said finally, pocketing the silk fragment with deliberate care, "that your mechanical marvel has just provided us with our first genuine clue. The question now becomes, who among Thornfield Manor's residents possesses both the knowledge to operate hidden controls and the inclination to conduct clandestine mechanical expeditions at dawn?" And with that observation, Lord Peter Whimsy prepared to discover just how many additional secrets lay concealed within the Manor's Gothic revival walls and Victorian mechanical innovations. The morning's revelations had transformed Thornfield Manor from a house of mechanical curiosities into something considerably more sinister. Inspector Grimsby of the County Constabulary arrived with the brisk efficiency of a man who preferred his mysteries solved before luncheon, accompanied by Sergeant Mills, whose notebook appeared to have been pressed into service as both investigative tool and shield against the Manor's more intimidating architectural features. "Lord Peter," Grimsby announced, consulting his notes with evident satisfaction, "I believe we've uncovered the heart of this matter. Captain Maurice's investigations into the estate finances have revealed systematic embezzlement spanning nearly 3 years. Rather substantial sums, I'm afraid." Sir Reginald's complexion had acquired the pallor of a man discovering that his domestic arrangements included not merely mechanical mysteries, but financial ones as well. "Embezzlement? Good heavens, Inspector. Surely you don't mean—" "I'm afraid I do, Sir Reginald. Your brother had documented evidence of fraudulent transactions totaling over £8,000, all bearing the same forged signature." Grimsby's pause was calculated for maximum dramatic effect. "Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth, your late brother's widow." The revelation struck the assembled company with the force of a mechanical failure in reverse instead of collapse. There was a sudden, uncomfortable clarity. Whimsy examined the meticulously organized documents that Captain Maurice had prepared, noting the deceased man's methodical approach to financial detection. Bank statements, cancelled checks, and correspondence painted a portrait of systematic deception that would have impressed Scotland Yard's fraud division. "The amounts are indeed substantial," Whimsy observed, his monocle catching the gaslight as he studied a particularly damning withdrawal authorization. "Sufficient motive for eliminating an inconveniently observant brother-in-law, though I confess myself curious about the timing of this morning's scheduled confrontation." "Precisely the point, Lord Peter," Grimsby continued with growing enthusiasm. "Captain Maurice had arranged to meet Mrs. Ashworth at 8 o'clock this morning to present his evidence and demand full restitution. Instead, he was discovered dead in that mechanical contraption at the very hour their meeting was to occur. Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth proved to be a woman of striking appearance and formidable self-possession. Whimsy found her in the morning room, arranging white roses with the sort of practiced elegance that suggested expensive finishing schools and continental sophistication. She possessed the refined beauty of a woman accustomed to admiration, though her black silk morning dress of exceptional quality, Whimsy noted, suggested appropriate grief for her recently deceased husband. "Lord Peter, how delightful to encounter someone of genuine cultivation in these rather trying circumstances," she said, her voice carrying traces of a carefully modulated accent that might have originated anywhere between Mayfair and Milan. "Though I confess poor Maurice's death has left us all quite devastated." Her composure was remarkable for a woman facing both bereavement and potential exposure for systematic fraud. Whimsy settled into a chair that appeared to have been upholstered by someone with strong opinions about the decorative potential of peacock feathers. "Mrs. Ashworth, please accept my condolences. I understand Captain Maurice had requested a private meeting with you this morning regarding certain financial irregularities." "Indeed, though I'm afraid Maurice's mental state had become increasingly unstable since his return from India." Her laugh was musical but somehow hollow, like silver bells heard through fog. "He had developed the most extraordinary theories about the estate accounts, quite paranoid, really. I had agreed to meet with him primarily to discuss seeking professional help for his condition. Professional help for suspicions that appear to have been entirely accurate." Whimsy's tone remained conversational, though his eyes had acquired the sharp focus of a man detecting interesting prey. Mrs. Ashworth's composure flickered momentarily, like gaslight disturbed by an unexpected draught. "I'm sure I don't understand your meaning, Lord Peter. The bank statements and forged authorizations suggest Captain Maurice's financial investigations were remarkably thorough. £8,000 represents considerable motivation for eliminating an inconvenient witness. You surely cannot be suggesting that I would murder my own husband over money?" Her indignation was perfectly calibrated, neither excessive nor insufficient. Maurice was troubled, Lord Peter. His experiences in India had affected his judgment about many things, including family loyalty and financial propriety. Inspector Grimsby, who had been examining the silk fragment recovered from the lift's emergency override, approached with evident satisfaction. "Mrs. Ashworth, I notice your morning dress is of particularly fine silk. Would you mind if we examined it for any recent tears or missing pieces?" She extended her arm with practiced grace, though Whimsy detected the faintest tremor in her fingers. "Certainly, Inspector, though I must say this dress is quite new. I had it made for poor Maurice's funeral arrangements." The silk was indeed of exceptional quality, and while no obvious damage was visible, Whimsy noted that the fabric's weave matched the fragment they had discovered. More intriguingly, he observed faint traces of what appeared to be hydraulic oil near the dress's hem, barely perceptible, but present nonetheless. "Mrs. Ashworth," Whimsy continued with deceptive mildness, "you mentioned that Captain Maurice's theories about financial irregularities were paranoid. Yet the documentation suggests his investigations were both methodical and accurate. Might one inquire how you account for this discrepancy?" Maurice had always been obsessive about details, Lord Peter. In India, this trait served him well. At home, it became problematic. He began seeing conspiracies where none existed, questioning transactions that were perfectly legitimate. "Transactions bearing your forged signature?" Her composure finally cracked, revealing something harder beneath the cultivated elegance. "Those signatures were authorized, Lord Peter. Maurice had given me power of attorney for certain estate matters during his absence. If the documentation appears irregular, it's merely a matter of clerical oversight." Inspector Grimsby consulted his notebook with evident triumph. Mrs. Ashworth, we've examined the power of attorney documents. They were revoked upon Captain Maurice's return from India, 3 months before these transactions occurred. The signatures are forgeries, and rather clumsy ones at that. The silence that followed was broken only by the faint ticking of the long-case clock in the hallway and the distant sound of steel cables settling in their housings. Mrs. Ashworth's carefully maintained facade had begun to crumble, revealing glimpses of something desperate beneath the polished surface. Inspector, Whimsy interjected quietly, while Mrs. Ashworth's financial motivations are undeniably compelling, I find myself curious about certain mechanical details. Might we examine the lift's emergency override once more? They returned to the shaft, where Whimsy knelt to study the brass control panel with renewed attention. The silk fragment had been caught at a specific height, and the fresh scratches on the emergency lever suggested someone familiar with its operation had used it recently. Mrs. Ashworth, Whimsy said, straightening with fluid grace, you mentioned knowing nothing about mechanical contrivances, yet someone with intimate knowledge of this lift's hidden controls operated them this morning. Someone wearing fine silk, someone who departed in considerable haste. I know nothing about that dreadful contraption. Lord Peter, my interests lie in more civilized pursuits. And yet, the hydraulic oil on your dress suggests recent contact with mechanical systems. The timing of your husband's death, coinciding precisely with your scheduled meeting, creates a rather compelling narrative. Inspector Grimsby nodded with satisfaction. The evidence is quite clear, Lord Peter. Financial motive, opportunity, physical evidence connecting her to the scene. Mrs. Ashworth clearly lured Captain Maurice into that mechanical death trap and activated the hidden controls. But as Whimsy stood in the gaslight's uncertain glow, studying Mrs. Ashworth's composed features and the inspector's eager certainty, he found himself oddly troubled by the case's apparent simplicity. The red herring had arrived with admirable punctuality, complete with motive, opportunity, and physical evidence, perhaps rather too complete for a mind that preferred its mysteries seasoned with genuine complexity. Indeed, Inspector, Whimsy murmured, his tone suggesting polite agreement, while his eyes held reservations that would have troubled a more observant man. The narrative certainly possesses a compelling directness, though I confess myself always intrigued by the precise mechanics of guilt, how it operates, where it catches, and whether it runs as smoothly as its designers intended. The obvious solution lay before them like a perfectly set table, waiting to be consumed. But Lord Peter Whimsy, connoisseur of human nature's more intricate mechanisms, was already wondering what additional courses this particular feast might provide. Inspector Grimsby departed with the satisfied air of a man who had wrapped up an untidy murder before luncheon, leaving behind a neat package of motive, opportunity, and silk fiber evidence that would have pleased any magistrate's sense of judicial efficiency. Whimsy, however, remained in the drawing room, regarding the inspector's conclusions with a sort of polite skepticism typically reserved for amateur performances of King Lear. Bunter, he announced, settling deeper into a chair that appeared to have been upholstered by someone with strong convictions about the decorative potential of stuffed peacocks. I find myself seized by an inexplicable fascination with the domestic minutiae of Thornfield Manor. Call it intellectual perversity, but I confess the obvious solution strikes me as rather too accommodating to be entirely trustworthy. Indeed, my lord, shall we begin with temporal considerations? Precisely. Time, as I have observed, is a domestic tyrant with decidedly unreliable habits in this establishment. Their investigation commenced with the long case clock in the main hall, a mahogany monument to Victorian precision that Whimsy examined with the absorbed attention of a scholar contemplating a particularly recalcitrant manuscript. Blackwood materialized with his customary spectral efficiency, bearing the sort of professional expression that suggested he had anticipated this line of inquiry. This elegant chronometer, Whimsy observed, consulting his pocket watch, appears to be running precisely 4 minutes ahead of Greenwich Mean Time. When was it last regulated? Every Sunday evening after prayers, my lord. It gains approximately 30 seconds daily in damp weather, which I account for when winding. Admirable precision. And the morning room clock? Blackwood's composure flickered almost imperceptibly. That particular timepiece has been temperamental of late, my lord. Yesterday morning I discovered it had stopped entirely at 10 minutes past 8, apparently due to a draught from an unlatched window. An unlatched window behind drawn curtains? Whimsy's monocle caught the gaslight with sharp interest. How extraordinarily convenient for someone requiring discreet access to temporal manipulation. They proceeded to examine the heavy velvet draperies that adorned the morning room window's curtains, thick enough, as Whimsy observed, to muffle a bishop's conscience. The fabric bore faint traces of soot along the hem, and the window casement showed fresh scratches around the latch mechanism. These curtains, Whimsy noted, running the velvet between his fingers, would effectively deaden sound from the corridor when drawn. One might operate mechanical systems with considerable noise while remaining acoustically invisible to anyone within this room. Bunter, who had been examining the Persian carpet with professional thoroughness, straightened with a discovery. My lord, this runner appears to have been recently repositioned. The nap runs against the natural light, and the border pattern is fractionally misaligned at the skirting. Blackwood flushed with wounded professional pride. Clask-like, I confess, my lord, I had the carpet rotated this morning to conceal an unsightly oil stain. I intended to send it for proper cleaning in Market Penny. Oil stains have such inconvenient timing, Whimsy murmured. Might one inquire when this domestic blemish first appeared? Yesterday evening, my lord, though I cannot account for its origin. Their perambulation led them to a discovery that proved considerably more intriguing than carpet maintenance, a narrow service lift concealed behind an innocuous panel near the pantry. The contraption was a masterpiece of Victorian ingenuity, operated by hand crank and counterweight, designed to transport meals between the kitchen and upper dining areas without troubling the family with servants' footsteps. Mrs. Higgins, Whimsy addressed the cook, who had been observing their investigations with the wary attention of someone whose culinary domain was being invaded by amateur detectives. You mentioned hearing mechanical rumbling yesterday morning. Might this have originated from your charming service lift rather than Sir Percival's grander hydraulic monument? Well now, my lord, Mrs. Higgins replied, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. That little hoist does wheeze something fierce when it's carrying heavy loads. Yesterday morning it was working overtime. What with breakfast trays and, she paused, her expression growing troubled, and other items requiring discreet transport. Other items? Mrs. Ashworth requested the service lift for moving certain personal effects, my lord. Said she needed documents relocated without disturbing the household during such trying circumstances. Whimsy exchanged glances with Bunter, noting how Mrs. Ashworth's consideration for household tranquility had extended to remarkably thorough knowledge of the manor's secondary mechanical systems. Their investigation culminated in the cellars, where Sir Percival's hydraulic masterpiece resided in all its brass-fitted glory. The main power switch remained padlocked in the off position, yet fresh oil stains on the stone flooring suggested recent mechanical activity. More tellingly, Whimsy discovered that someone had swept the area around the hydraulic pump with unusual thoroughness, the sort of meticulous cleaning that suggested intimate familiarity with the evidence that coal dust and mechanical oil might provide to observant investigators. Bunter, Whimsy observed, kneeling to examine faint heel impressions in the swept dust. Note these markings. One set appears to be from a lady's narrow French heel, while the other suggests a gentleman's broader sole. Both quite recent, and both indicating someone who moved through this space with considerable purpose. More intriguing still was Whimsy's discovery of a secondary control panel, cleverly concealed behind a loose stone in the cellar wall. The brass fittings were polished to mirror brightness, and the mechanism showed clear evidence of recent operation. How fascinating, Whimsy murmured, examining the hidden controls with growing appreciation for their designer's ingenuity. Sir Percival appears to have installed not merely a mechanical lift, but an entire secondary operating system. One might almost conclude that the good gentleman anticipated the need for alternative operational procedures. As they prepared to ascend from the cellars, the distant sound of steel cables and hydraulic pressure echoed through the manor's walls, once again the lift operating at precisely 7:15, just as it had that morning, and Whimsy now suspected every morning for some considerable time. Inspector Grimsby's solution possesses admirable directness, Whimsy remarked to Bunter as they climbed the service stairs, but I find myself increasingly convinced that Mrs. Ashworth's guilt, while theatrically satisfying, may be merely the most visible layer of a considerably more intricate mechanism. Someone has been operating these mechanical systems with remarkable regularity and intimate knowledge of their hidden features. He paused at the top of the stairs, his expression acquiring the focused intensity of a hunting hound detecting genuinely interesting prey. The question, my dear Bunter, is not whether Mrs. Ashworth committed murder, but whether she committed the particular murder for which she is about to be arrested. I suspect our mechanical marvel has been serving purposes rather more complex than merely transporting inconvenient brothers-in-law to their deaths. The obvious solution lay before them like a perfectly set table, but Lord Peter Whimsy, connoisseur of human nature's more sophisticated deceptions, was beginning to suspect that this particular feast would prove to have considerably more courses than Inspector Grimsby had anticipated. The following morning found Whimsy in the breakfast room, contemplating his kippers with the sort of philosophical detachment that suggested his mind was wrestling with considerably weightier matters than smoked fish. Time, he had long observed, possessed the disagreeable habit of revealing inconvenient truths to those persistent enough to interrogate its witnesses properly. Bunter, he announced, consulting the detailed chart his valet had prepared overnight, I find myself seized by an almost indecent fascination with the temporal habits of this establishment. Time, as I have remarked before, is the one servant who never answers the bell, but always knows precisely when it was rung. Their investigation commenced with Thornfield Manor's collection of chronometers, each of which appeared to maintain its own peculiar relationship with Greenwich Mean Time. The hall's long-case clock, that mahogany monument to Victorian precision, ran exactly 4 minutes fast, a consistent error that Blackwood corrected for religiously each Sunday evening. The morning-room clock, however, had stopped at precisely 10 minutes past 8, its hands frozen like a scandalized dowager's fingers. Agnes discovered this temporal casualty at 8:30, Whimsy observed, examining the stopped timepiece with his magnifying glass. Yet she found the window unlatched behind drawn curtains, a most curious arrangement for someone supposedly arranging flowers in the conservatory. He conducted a simple experiment, having Agnes recreate the conditions she had described. With the curtains drawn and the window cracked precisely as she had found it, the resulting draught proved sufficient to extinguish the clock's delicate mechanism within moments, which suggests, Whimsy murmured, that someone with considerable knowledge of domestic chronometry was concerned to establish a specific time for the historical record. Their acoustic investigation proved equally illuminating. Whimsy positioned himself in various locations throughout the manor, while Bunter operated both the main hydraulic lift and the smaller service lift from the cellars. The results painted a fascinating picture of selective audibility. From the conservatory, where Mrs. Ashworth claimed to have been arranging flowers, the main lift's operation was entirely inaudible, masked by the glass walls and the steady percussion of condensation from the heating pipes. The service lift, conversely, produced only the faintest whisper, easily mistaken for settling timber or distant plumbing. Observe, Bunter, Whimsy noted, timing the service lift's journey with his pocket watch. This charming domestic convenience requires precisely 17 seconds when loaded, 9 when empty. Mrs. Higgins mentioned hearing it operate twice yesterday morning, once with a proper wheeze at 7:20 and again at 7:55. Light as a birdcage, the timing measurements revealed additional impossibilities. From Mrs. Ashworth's conservatory to the lift shaft required 1 minute and 43 seconds via the main corridor, a route that passed directly by the morning room where Sir Reginald was conducting correspondence. The servants' passage added 34 seconds but necessitated traversing Mrs. Higgins' kitchen domain. The exterior route through the rose garden required over 3 minutes and would inevitably leave traces of morning dew and distinctive clay soil. Yet Mrs. Ashworth's silk morning dress remained pristine, no dew, no soil, no hydraulic oil from the lift's mechanical components. Her elegant French shoes showed no evidence of outdoor excursion or cellar exploration. Fascinating, Whimsy observed, examining the dress with professional thoroughness. Our Mrs. Ashworth appears to have committed murder without leaving any physical trace of her journey to or from the scene. Either she possesses supernatural powers of locomotion or someone else entirely operated those mechanical systems. The most damning evidence, however, emerged from Grogan's reluctant testimony about Captain Maurice's morning routine. The deceased had maintained an invariable constitutional departing the manor at precisely 7:30 each morning and returning by 8:15, a habit so rigid that the household staff set their own schedules by his movements. "Consider the implications, Bunter," Whimsy said, consulting his notes with growing satisfaction. Inspector Grimsby's timeline places the fatal meeting at 8 o'clock, precisely when Captain Maurice should have been 20 minutes into his morning walk. Either he broke a lifelong habit for this clandestine appointment, or the meeting occurred at an entirely different time than claimed. The telephone records, obtained from the admirably precise Miss Pritchard at the Market Penny Exchange, provided the final piece of temporal evidence. Mrs. Ashworth had indeed placed calls at the time she claimed, but examination of the morning room telephone revealed fresh wear marks on the cord and faint impressions in the Persian carpet, suggesting the instrument had been relocated during use. Someone, Whimsy concluded, conducted those conversations while positioned considerably closer to the mechanical lift than the morning room's normal arrangement would permit. The question becomes whether Mrs. Ashworth was establishing an alibi or monitoring mechanical operations while maintaining the pretense of domestic correspondence. The hydraulic lift itself possessed its own temporal requirements. Sir Percival's obsessively calibrated system required exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds to complete a full cycle from cellar to third floor and return. Yet Mrs. Higgins had heard the proper, working noise at 7 o'clock, a full hour before the alleged meeting time. "The mathematics are quite unforgiving, Bunter," Whimsy observed, standing beside the brass control panel where they had discovered the silk fragment. "If the lift operated at 7 o'clock as Mrs. Higgins testified, and Captain Maurice maintained his usual routine, then our victim was neither present nor available for mechanical dispatch at the time claimed." He examined the traces of chloral hydrate on the lift's brass door handle, evidence of chemical assistance that would have rendered Captain Maurice incapable of operating emergency controls, regardless of his mechanical expertise. Someone possessing both medical knowledge and mechanical sophistication ensured that our victim would be helpless during his final journey, Whimsy concluded. The question becomes, who in this establishment combines such diverse talents with intimate knowledge of hidden control systems and hydraulic timing? As they stood in the gaslight's uncertain glow, surrounded by the manor's Gothic revival pretensions and Victorian mechanical innovations, Whimsy found himself confronting not merely a murder, but an elaborate chronological construction designed to frame an obvious suspect. "The inspector's solution possesses admirable directness," he remarked to Bunter, closing his notebook with decisive finality. "But I find myself convinced that Mrs. Ashworth's guilt, while theatrically satisfying, represents merely the most visible layer of a considerably more sophisticated mechanism. Someone has orchestrated these events with the sort of temporal artistry that suggests not merely criminal intent, but criminal genius." The manor's various timepieces continued their discordant chorus, each marking moments with slightly different rhythms, as though Thornfield Manor itself were maintaining multiple versions of the truth in careful, calculated discord. And Lord Peter Whimsy, connoisseur of human nature's more intricate deceptions, was beginning to suspect that the real murderer possessed both the patience and the precision to construct an alibi that would have satisfied any magistrate's sense of judicial efficiency, save for the inconvenient fact that time itself refused to cooperate with even the most elegantly fabricated lies. The revelation arrived through the mundane agency of domestic correspondence, though its implications proved anything but ordinary. While examining the morning room's Persian carpet for additional evidence of temporal manipulation, Whimsy discovered that the escritoire's seemingly solid construction concealed a rather more sophisticated secret than mere furniture craftsmanship. A loose floorboard beneath the writing desk yielded to gentle pressure, revealing a cavity that contained not merely hidden documents, but an entire alternative existence that transformed Captain Maurice from a straightforward military gentleman into something considerably more complex. The cache of letters, meticulously organized and spanning nearly 2 years, painted a portrait of systematic investigation that had evolved into something far more dangerous than mere financial auditing. "Bunter," Whimsy observed, examining the correspondence with growing fascination, "our late captain appears to have possessed entrepreneurial instincts that extended well beyond conventional military procurement. These documents suggest he had discovered not merely embezzlement, but an entire criminal enterprise operating beneath Thornfield Manor's Gothic revival. Respectability." The letters revealed that Captain Maurice had indeed detected the financial irregularities Inspector Grimsby had documented, but his investigations had uncovered something far more sophisticated than simple theft. Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth had been conducting systematic blackmail operations against several prominent families across 3 counties, each involving carefully documented indiscretions that would have scandalized drawing rooms from Yorkshire to Surrey. More disturbing still was the evidence that this blackmail enterprise was merely one layer of an elaborate deception. Maurice's final letters, written in increasingly agitated handwriting, detailed his growing suspicion that Mrs. Ashworth was not who she claimed to be. His methodical investigation had revealed discrepancies in her background, inconsistencies in her personal history, and most damning of all, evidence that the real Cordelia Ashworth had died of influenza in a Brighton boarding house 18 months previously. The woman presenting herself as Maurice's grieving widow, Whimsy read from the investigator's report Maurice had commissioned, is actually Miss Catherine Pembroke, a former actress and confidence trickster who assumed the deceased woman's identity with theatrical precision. The performance has been flawless because it was based on extensive preparation and natural dramatic talent. The impersonation had been maintained through careful study of the real Cordelia's correspondence, mannerisms, and personal history. Miss Pembroke had even arranged for the genuine woman's death to appear natural, though the investigator's notes suggested uncomfortable questions about the convenient timing of that particular influenza outbreak. But Maurice's discoveries extended beyond mere identity theft into the mechanical heart of Thornfield Manor itself. His journal, discovered beneath a second loose floorboard, contained detailed technical diagrams showing modifications to the side, hydraulic lift system modifications that transformed Sir Percival's domestic convenience into something far more sinister. "Observe these schematics, Bunter," Whimsy said, examining the meticulously drawn mechanical diagrams. Maurice had documented not merely the lift's current configuration, but evidence of recent alterations to its safety mechanisms. Someone with considerable engineering knowledge had been systematically compromising the system's redundant protections. The journal revealed that Maurice had discovered a secondary control system concealed within the manor's walls, a network of hidden passages and mechanical apparatus that Sir Percival had installed for purposes that remained mysteriously undocumented. The late patriarch's obsession with mechanical innovations had extended far beyond the visible hydraulic lift to include soundproofed chambers, concealed access routes, and what Maurice termed acoustic isolation systems. More tellingly, Maurice had detected traces of specialized lubricating oil throughout these hidden mechanisms, the same high-grade substance Whimsy had found on the emergency override controls. This particular oil was not commonly available to domestic users, requiring special ordering from industrial suppliers who maintained careful records of their clientele. The telephone records from Market Penny, Whimsy observed, consulting his notes from their village investigation, show that Mrs. Ashworth, or rather Miss Pembroke, had indeed placed orders for specialized mechanical supplies from a London firm. The timing corresponds precisely with Maurice's documentation of the lift modifications. The final entries in Maurice's journal revealed his plan to confront Miss Pembroke with evidence of both her fraudulent identity and her mechanical sabotage. He had arranged to meet her not in the morning room at 8 o'clock, as she had claimed to Inspector Grimsby, but in the cellars at 7 o'clock, beside the very hydraulic systems she had corrupted. Unfortunately, Whimsy concluded, organizing the documents with methodical precision, Maurice's sense of military justice proved considerably stronger than his instinct for self-preservation. He scheduled a confrontation with a woman who had already committed multiple murders to maintain her false identity, a tactical error that cost him his life. The correspondence also revealed Miss Pembroke's medical accomplice, Dr. Pemberton, whose gambling debts had made him susceptible to blackmail and subsequently willing to provide both chloral hydrate and professional silence about suspicious deaths. The doctor's involvement explained both the chemical evidence on the lift's controls and the curiously incomplete post-mortem examination that had failed to detect obvious signs of drugging. As Whimsy stood in the morning room's uncertain gaslight, surrounded by evidence of an elaborate criminal enterprise disguised as domestic bereavement, he found himself confronting not merely a clever murder, but an entire alternative reality constructed through systematic deception and maintained through calculated violence. "The question now, Bunter," he observed, carefully replacing the documents in their hiding place, "is whether our theatrical murderer has prepared an encore performance, or whether she considers her current role sufficiently secure to risk a final bow. Miss Catherine Pembroke has created a masterpiece of criminal artistry, a false identity so complete that even her victim's family accepted her performance without question. The Gothic Revival manor had indeed concealed secrets beneath its architectural pretensions, but they were considerably more sophisticated than mere family financial disputes. The mechanical innovations that Sir Percival had installed with such pride had been corrupted into instruments of murder by someone who understood both their operation and their potential for concealing evidence. I suspect, Bunter, that our next act will require a rather more dramatic revelation than Inspector Grimsby's straightforward arrest warrant. Miss Pembroke has spent considerable effort constructing her performance. It seems only proper that we should provide her with an appropriately theatrical finale." The obvious solution of Mrs. Ashworth's guilt remained theatrically satisfying, but Lord Peter Whimsy, connoisseur of human nature's more intricate deceptions, now understood that the real performance was considerably more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The question was no longer who had committed murder, but whether the murderer could be persuaded to step out of character long enough to face the consequences of her artistry. The revelation arrived through the deceptively mundane medium of Georgian silver, though its implications proved considerably more sinister than questions of proper household management. Whimsy discovered the crucial evidence while examining the morning room's vast sideboard, where an ornate salver displayed the sort of elaborate positioning that suggested recent disturbance from its customary arrangement. "Blackwood?" he inquired with characteristic mildness. "This charming piece of family silver appears to have been relocated recently. Might one inquire about its usual placement?" The butler's composure, previously as unshakable as Thornfield's Gothic foundations, developed its first visible crack. "Indeed, my lord. The salver normally rests beside the telephone apparatus, but yesterday morning I discovered it positioned on the window ledge. Most irregular, as it bears the family crest and requires careful placement for proper display." Whimsy examined the salver with his magnifying glass, noting not merely tarnish patterns, but faint scratches along its rim, suggesting recent contact with mechanical components. More tellingly, he detected traces of the specialized lubricating oil they had found throughout the lift systems, evidence that this Georgian masterpiece had been pressed into service for purposes its original craftsman had never contemplated. The salver's significance became apparent when Whimsy realized its position on the window ledge provided a perfect reflecting surface for observing corridor traffic, a domestic periscope allowing someone to monitor approaching footsteps while maintaining the appearance of conducting telephone conversations. More damning still, someone had scratched crude timing notations on the silver's underside, marks corresponding exactly with the hydraulic lift's operational cycles. Someone used this elegant piece to calculate precise intervals for operating mechanical systems without detection. Whimsy observed to Bunter, "The question becomes whether our theatrical murderer required such systematic preparation or whether she recruited assistants for her performance." The answer emerged through Agnes, the senior housemaid, whose nervous demeanor had initially suggested mere domestic anxiety about murder investigations. Under Whimsy's gentle but persistent questioning, however, her testimony revealed inconsistencies that transformed her from peripheral witness to unwitting accomplice. "Agnes," Whimsy began, settling into the morning room chair that provided optimal views of both salver and corridor. "You mentioned discovering the stopped clock at 8:30 yesterday morning. Yet, Mrs. Higgins places you in the kitchen at 8:15, helping with breakfast preparations. Might you clarify this temporal discrepancy?" Through tears and stammered confessions, the truth emerged like water through a failing dam. Agnes had indeed been recruited as an accomplice, though her understanding of the crime's scope had been deliberately limited by Miss Pembroke's careful manipulation. "She told me Captain Maurice had been stealing from the family accounts," Agnes sobbed. "Said he needed teaching a lesson, but not permanent harm. She just wanted to frighten him into confessing and making restitution." Agnes's role had been precisely calibrated, ensuring the morning room remained undisturbed during crucial periods, manipulating the window latch to create drafts that would stop the temperamental clock, and positioning the Georgian salver for optimal surveillance. Most tellingly, she admitted to helping transport modernization equipment between cellars and upper floors using the service lift. "She had brass fittings and steel cables, my lord. Said they were safety improvements for family use. But looking back, I think she was making the lift more dangerous instead." The housemaid's confession revealed additional sophistication in Miss Pembroke's preparations. She had spent weeks studying the manor's acoustic properties, timing servants' routines, and conducting what she termed mechanical experiments during the household's sleeping hours. But Agnes's testimony provided the crucial link to a detail that had puzzled Whimsy since his arrival: the faint, rhythmic clanking that had echoed through the morning room when the lift was supposedly secured. Captain Maurice's journal had documented not merely Sir Percival's visible innovations, but hidden compartments within the lift shaft designed for discreet disposal, connecting to the manor's original drainage system. "The clanking we heard upon arrival," Whimsy explained to a pale Sir Reginald, "was not mechanical failure, but Miss Pembroke's final act of evidence disposal. She had murdered Maurice at 7 o'clock, not 8 as claimed, then used the lift's hidden compartment to dispose of the chloral hydrate bottle, syringe, and other incriminating materials. The timing analysis revealed the elegant complexity of the deception. The morning room clock had been deliberately stopped at 10 minutes past 8 through Agnes's window manipulation, but the hall clock's 4-minute advancement meant the actual time was only 6 minutes past, providing a false temporal anchor for the entire investigation. Miss Pembroke conducted her post-murder cleanup even as we arrived to investigate," Whimsy continued, his appreciation for criminal artistry evident in his tone. "The silk fragment we discovered was not evidence of struggle during the murder, but of her operating the emergency override while disposing of evidence, believing herself unobserved due to the manor's acoustic isolation. The Georgian salver represented more than mere surveillance equipment. It demonstrated systematic preparation, extending far beyond spontaneous violence. Miss Catherine Pembroke had not merely committed murder, she had choreographed it with attention to detail that would have impressed London's finest theatrical directors. The twist in Agnes's testimony transforms our understanding completely," Whimsy observed, organizing the evidence with methodical precision. "We have not been investigating a crime of passion disguised as mechanical failure, but rather an elaborate criminal performance complete with recruited supporting cast, carefully orchestrated misdirection, and post-murder cleanup conducted with breathtaking audacity." As Whimsy stood in the morning room's uncertain gaslight, surrounded by evidence of systematic deception maintained through calculated manipulation of both mechanical systems and human psychology, he found himself confronting not merely murder, but criminal artistry of the highest order. "I believe, Bunter, that our final act will require a stage worthy of such ambitious theatrical pretensions. Miss Catherine Pembroke has created a masterpiece of criminal performance art. It seems only appropriate that we should provide her with an appropriately dramatic finale." The obvious solution of Mrs. Ashworth's guilt remained theatrically satisfying, but the twisted testimony had revealed that the real performance was considerably more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The question now was whether the leading lady could be persuaded to take her final bow before an audience that finally understood the true scope of her deadly artistry. The midnight hour struck with ecclesiastical solemnity, as Lord Peter Wimsey materialized in Thornfield Manor's main hall with the sort of theatrical precision that suggested either supernatural intervention or meticulous preparation. He had vanished from his chambers at 10:30, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive tobacco and Bunter's diplomatically evasive explanations about nocturnal architectural appreciation. Now, at precisely 12 o'clock by the corrected hall chronometer, he stood before the assembled household with the satisfied expression of a man who had spent his evening conducting the sort of mechanical investigations that would have impressed Sir Percival himself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wimsey announced, his monocle catching the gaslight with sharp gleam, "I have requested this rather unconventional gathering to demonstrate that Thornfield Manor's mechanical innovations extend considerably beyond the visible hydraulic apparatus. The house, it appears, has been keeping secrets that prove rather more significant than mere domestic convenience." Sir Reginald, roused from uneasy sleep by Bunter's polite but insistent summons, stood pale and bewildered beside Inspector Grimsby, whose expression suggested professional skepticism about midnight revelations. Miss Catherine Pembroke, maintaining her widow's composure despite the late hour, observed the proceedings with the sort of professional attention that theatrical training provides for unexpected script changes. "Observe," Wimsey continued, producing a brass key from his waistcoat pocket, "that Sir Percival's mechanical genius included not merely the lift we have examined, but an entire network of concealed passages accessible through hidden panels within the shaft itself." He gestured toward what appeared to be solid oak paneling beside the lift doors, yet yielded to pressure at a specific point, revealing a narrow chamber equipped with its own brass controls and acoustic dampening materials. The hidden compartment connected to additional passages throughout the manor's walls, a network that explained how someone might operate mechanical systems while remaining invisible to household observation. This particular innovation, Wimsey explained, demonstrating the concealed controls with professional appreciation, allows for discreet monitoring of lift operations, disposal of incriminating evidence, and conduct of clandestine activities without detection. Someone with intimate knowledge of these systems has been using them for purposes Sir Percival never contemplated. The demonstration continued, as Wimsey revealed the true significance of details that had puzzled the investigation from its beginning. The Georgian salver, repositioned on the morning room window ledge, had served as both surveillance mirror and calculation device, its polished surface allowing observation of corridor traffic, while crude timing notations scratched on its underside provided precise intervals for mechanical operations. "Missus," Higgins heard the lift operate with a proper wheeze at 7 o'clock, Wimsey observed, consulting his meticulously prepared timeline. Yet Miss Pembroke claimed Captain Maurice scheduled their confrontation for 8 o'clock. The discrepancy reveals not confusion, but deliberate misdirection designed to establish a false chronology. He turned to address Miss Catherine Pembroke directly, his tone remaining conversational despite the gravity of his accusations. Captain Maurice, being a gentleman of rigid habits, would never have broken his morning constitutional routine for a meeting he anticipated would prove unpleasant. The encounter you arranged was not the encounter that occurred, because you had already eliminated your victim an hour before your supposed appointment. The mechanical demonstration that followed proved both illuminating and damning. Wimsey showed how the lift's hidden compartment connected to the manor's original drainage system through Sir Percival's ingenious waste disposal chute, a feature that explained the rhythmic clanking they had heard upon. Arrival as evidence made its unceremonious exit through Victorian plumbing. The murder itself required both medical knowledge and mechanical sophistication, Wimsey continued, producing a small empty vial he had recovered from the hidden compartment. Dr. Pemberton, whose gambling debts made him susceptible to blackmail, provided chloral hydrate and administered it to Captain Maurice during what the victim believed was a consultation about the lift's compromised safety mechanisms. The timeline reconstruction revealed elegant criminal artistry. Miss Pembroke had studied the manor's acoustic properties, timing servants' routines, and conducting mechanical experiments during sleeping hours. Agnes, the unwitting accomplice, had been recruited to manipulate the morning room clock through window drafts while positioning the Georgian salver for optimal surveillance. At 7 o'clock precisely, Whimsy explained with quiet precision, Captain Maurice, already incapacitated by Dr. Pemberton's chemical assistance, was placed in the lift. You, Miss Pembroke, descended to the cellar, activated the hidden controls, and ensured his final journey. The compromised safety mechanisms you had installed guaranteed that mechanical failure would appear responsible for his death. The silk fragment discovered on the emergency override represented not evidence of struggle during murder, but Miss Pembroke's post-murder cleanup operating the hidden controls to dispose of incriminating materials through Sir Percival's waste disposal system, while believing herself unobserved due to the manor's acoustic isolation. The obvious solution of Mrs. Ashworth's guilt possessed theatrical satisfaction, Whimsy concluded, his appreciation for criminal artistry evident in his tone. But you, Miss Catherine Pembroke, created something far more sophisticated, an entire alternative identity maintained through systematic deception and protected through calculated violence. As the assembled company absorbed the implications of Whimsy's reconstruction, Miss Pembroke's carefully maintained composure finally showed its first genuine cracks. The elegant confidence that had sustained her performance as the grieving widow began to falter, revealing glimpses of the calculating intelligence beneath the theatrical facade. Inspector Grimsby, who had been examining the evidence with growing comprehension, stepped forward with professional satisfaction. Miss Catherine Pembroke, he announced formally, I arrest you for the willful murder of Captain Maurice Thornfield and for the systematic fraud perpetrated under the false identity of Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth. The Gothic Revival manor, with its architectural pretensions and Victorian mechanical innovations, had finally revealed the full scope of its secrets. The theatrical reveal was complete, and the unmasking had begun in earnest. Lord Peter Whimsy, connoisseur of human nature's more sophisticated deceptions, had successfully exposed what proved to be one of the most elaborately staged criminal performances he had ever encountered. The question now was whether Miss Catherine Pembroke possessed sufficient theatrical courage to deliver her final lines before an audience that had finally understood the true sophistication of her deadly artistry. The silence that followed Whimsy's theatrical revelation possessed the peculiar quality of a held breath, the moment when an audience realizes that the performance they have been watching was considerably more sinister than advertised. Miss Catherine Pembroke stood beneath the gaslight's uncertain glow, her elegant composure intact, but somehow brittle, like fine porcelain subjected to sudden temperature changes. Lord Peter, she said, her voice retaining its carefully modulated accent, though a trained ear might have detected the faintest tremor, your reconstruction possesses admirable dramatic flair. Though I confess myself puzzled by this sudden transformation from grieving widow to theatrical criminal, surely such elaborate accusations require rather more substantial proof than mechanical speculation and servant gossip. Whimsy regarded her with the sort of polite attention typically reserved for amateur performances of Shakespeare, interested but not entirely convinced by the quality of interpretation. Indeed, Miss Pembroke, though I find the proof rather compellingly arranged by your own artistic sensibilities. The Georgian salver with its timing calculations, the specialized lubricating oil on your morning dress, Agnes's testimony about your nocturnal mechanical experiments, each detail supports the others with mathematical precision. Inspector Grimsby stepped forward, consulting his notebook with evident satisfaction. Miss Catherine Pembroke, the evidence is overwhelming. The forged documents, the false identity, Captain Maurice's journal detailing his discoveries about your true background. We have statements from Dr. Pemberton regarding the chloral hydrate and witnesses to your systematic blackmail operations across 3 counties. For the first time since Whimsy's investigation began, Miss Pembroke's theatrical mask showed genuine cracks. Her hands, previously folded with practiced grace, began to tremble almost imperceptibly. The elegant confidence that had sustained her performance as the grieving widow started to fracture, revealing glimpses of something more desperate beneath the polished surface. "Dr. Pemberton," she repeated, her accent shifting subtly towards something less cultivated, "has always been remarkably susceptible to financial pressure. His gambling debts make him an unreliable witness at best." "Unreliable, perhaps," Whimsy observed mildly, "but remarkably consistent in his details about your medical requirements. Chloral hydrate in sufficient quantities to render a grown man helpless, administered during what Captain Maurice believed was a consultation about lift safety mechanisms. The good doctor's cooperation became quite enthusiastic once we mentioned his outstanding debts to certain unsavory establishments." The accusation struck with visible force. Miss Pembroke's composure finally began to crumble in earnest, the carefully constructed facade of continental sophistication dissolving to reveal something harder and more calculating beneath. "You speak of proof and witnesses," she said, her voice losing its theatrical resonance. "But you understand nothing about necessity, about survival, in a world that offers women precious few alternatives to poverty or dependence." Sir Reginald, who had been observing with horrified fascination, stepped forward with trembling indignation. "My brother trusted you. Maurice believed you were his wife, that you shared his concerns about family honor. He died because he tried to protect what he thought was his family." The words struck like a physical blow. For a moment, Miss Catherine Pembroke's theatrical training deserted her entirely, revealing raw emotion beneath the calculated performance. Quote, "Your brother," she whispered, her voice breaking with something approaching genuine grief, "was indeed a gentleman. He offered kindness when I expected suspicion, treated me with respect when I deserved only contempt. But he would have destroyed everything, the position, the security, the life I had built from nothing." She turned to face Whimsy with desperate defiance. "You cannot understand, Lord Peter, what it means to construct an entire existence from other people's discarded identities." Catherine Pembroke was nothing, a failed actress, a confidence trickster, a woman whose only talents were deception and survival. But Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth had position, respect, a place in society that no one questioned. "Until Captain Maurice's inconvenient investigations threatened to expose your masterpiece," Whimsy concluded with quiet precision. "The blackmail operations, the systematic fraud, the elaborate impersonation, all maintained through calculated violence when necessary. Inspector Grimsby produced handcuffs with bureaucratic efficiency. Miss Catherine Pembroke, I arrest you for the willful murder of Captain Maurice Thornfield and for systematic fraud perpetrated under false identity." As the steel bracelets clicked into place, she managed one final smile, theatrical to the last. "At least grant me this, Lord Peter, it was rather a magnificent performance while it lasted. The grieving widow, the wronged woman seeking justice, I gave them exactly what they expected to see." "Indeed," Whimsy acknowledged with genuine appreciation for criminal artistry. "Your performance has been remarkable in its completeness, though I confess, Miss Pembroke, that like all great theatrical tragedies, it contained the seeds of its own destruction. Your artistic pride betrayed you the cultural knowledge that exceeded your assumed character's background. The mechanical sophistication that revealed engineering training no grieving widow should possess." As Inspector Grimsby led her toward the door, Miss Catherine Pembroke cast one final look around Thornfield Manor's Gothic revival pretensions. "The house," she murmured, "was the perfect stage. Sir Percival designed it for secrets, I merely provided them with more interesting content." The heavy oak door closed behind them with ecclesiastical finality, leaving the assembled household to contemplate the elaborate deception that had been conducted beneath their very noses. In the sudden silence, the manor itself seemed to exhale a long, tired settling of timbers and secrets finally revealed. Lord Peter Whimsy stood a moment longer in the gaslight's uncertain glow, listening to the distant sound of steel cables settling in their housings, the mechanical heartbeat of a house that had finally finished keeping its most dangerous secret.